Impalas and Thompson's gazelles. These beautiful animals are a very popular attraction here at the San Diego Zoo, but they're a long way from their natural African home. Hi, I'm George Page for Nature, and these shy, swift creatures, they can run up to 40 miles an hour, are from Tanzania's famous Serengeti Plain, a vast area of great importance to the wildlife of East Africa. Natural history filmmakers have often been drawn to the Serengeti to film its great variety of wildlife. But our film is different. It's about a single kind of tree, one of the few trees that can survive the extreme climate of the Serengeti. It's a tough tree, and it has its own defenses. It's a tree of thorns, known as the acacia. Without it, Thompson's gazelles, the impalas, the giraffes, elephants, and even many insects would find it almost impossible to survive, because for them, the tree is food, shade, hunting ground, home. It's the tree of thorns. The Serengeti, a living landscape in Africa, a restless beauty, seemingly permanent, yet constantly changing. Within that landscape, a tree, stolid and elegant, but again, with only a passing glory. Call it umbrella tree, flat-topped acacia, or just a tree of thorns. Its familiar outline is etched across East Africa. But nowhere does its story matter more than in these Serengeti woodlands in Tanzania. An acacia woodland is a living, changing city, and just like buildings, individual trees in time come and go, while below and around them a rich flow of life moves in the highways of the undergrowth. There are several types of acacia thorn trees in such a woodland. This so-called whistling thorn has innumerable galls filled with biting ants that find a home here and in return afford the bush some protection. The whistling thorn prefers to grow in one type of soil, while the tall, gracious fever tree favors another, usually close to water. Away from the rivers grows our tree of thorns, properly called Acacia tortilis, to distinguish it from 800 other acacia types. In, on, under, and over such a tree sit, crawl, hunt, and feed the many creatures that share this building in a woodland city. A multitude of mouths actually eat the tree, a process which can bring about the complete destruction of what is a home or a hiding place for so many animals. So just how is life in this city able to cope? To understand that, we must understand our tree. Right from its birth, when the first seed leaves poke up into the African sun, it's a potential salad for something. Many don't even reach this leafier stage before they become dinner for a dik-dik. These tiny, shy antelopes have very mobile, elongated snouts, which help them pick out the tasty young shoots from the grass. Such a gleaning of greenery is naturally accompanied by a scattering of fertilizing dung. If the seedling could grow unbrowsed, it would be this tall in about 3 months. As it is, it's probably taken a year. Our baby tree needs some means of fending off the browsers, and almost from birth, it puts out tiny defensive spikes. Soft at first, they harden into many weapons. Now our tree does something very special. It spreads out sideways. In doing so, it shades the ground, so rival seedlings can't grow under it. Surprisingly, that low bush is as much a thorn tree as the older, mature tree beyond it. In fact, all these bushes are thorn trees in the making. Under their spread skirts of foliage, their roots get a better share of the meager moisture in the soil during the dry months. But how long does it take before the bushes become trees? It could be as little as 10 years, but for many reasons it's more likely to take 50. Partly it's the fault of being edible. Even that formidable armory of spines often proves a poor barrier to browsers. The narrow muzzles of a hungry impala herd can penetrate an acacia's defenses. On these larger bushes, the impalas merely trim the skirt, while other mouths are at work within. A rather unacrobatic animal called the bush hyrax also gingerly extracts a meal of leaves from between the thorns. It's a zoological curiosity for several reasons. One is that it's what's called a living fossil. There were hyraxes in existence long before other hoofed animals. And that's the other curiosity. It's related to animals with hooves. This caterpillar disarms the bush and makes itself a jacket of thorns. They're bound together with silk. It's the voracious caterpillar of the bagworm moth. If it's a female, it will never leave its thorn bag, and the male must mate with her inside. The rich protein content of a younger thorn bush can attract that largest of land animals. And despite the thorns, it can eat the whole thing. But oddly, it's the tallest of creatures, the giraffe, that's the real thorn in the side of the acacia. An efficient browsing machine at work, skillfully nibbling the succulent, softer, more nutritious tips of the branches. But its mouth is able to cope with the thornier branches, too. Over the years, strict conservation measures have increased the number of browsers in the Serengeti. They're well nourished because there are plenty of bushes around, and so are producing more calves. The result? Not only more giraffes, but the thorny bushes are held back, unable to escape these hungry mouths and grow up into mature trees. The giraffe's unique construction allows it to browse at all levels. It doesn't have a directly destructive effect on an acacia, as an elephant does by consuming a whole bush. But naturalists are now learning that it has an indirect effect that's less obvious, but just as damaging. Like any plant, an acacia's growth is speeded up or slowed down by weather conditions or diseases, as well as just being eaten. In addition, the giraffe, by preventing the full and rapid growth of the thorn tree, increases the young tree's vulnerability to an even greater enemy, fire. Every year there are fires in the Serengeti. Fire is one of the natural forces that shape this landscape. Vast burns sweep across the plains, fanned by persistent winds. They present a real threat to the young stages of the thorn tree. If the grass is still green enough, the fire may not burn too fiercely, so there's a chance that a young bush might escape. But for any seedling, there's little hope. These bushes, which the browsing giraffes have been cropping, are especially vulnerable. They're choked with long, dry grass. The entire bush seems to explode as the fire eats into it. In a few brief hours, this woodland has been toasted to a crisp. What was green has gone. For all but the oldest trees, apparently it's the end. Extensive fires at the start of the dry season can spell disaster for animals as well. But the land is resilient, and the grass does cover it again, although the fire has left its mark. The young thorn trees bear witness not only to that fire, but to fires of years gone by. The burn that killed these branches happened 2 years ago, but miraculously, this young tree survived and grew another skirt of foliage below. This year, that too has been burned. The secret of this thorn tree's survival lies in its roots, which are still very much alive. They may, in fact, be as much as 30 years old. The bush has been unable to grow into a mature tree because it's been continually browsed by giraffes and therefore has remained vulnerable to every successive fire. The thorn trees haven't given up the struggle to grow, but the fires, the giraffes, and other subtle influences are all out of balance now, and the landscape is slowly losing that full splendor of the mature acacias. This tree of thorns was young more than a century ago. These were perhaps seedlings when explorers first went searching for the Nile. And one could guess that in those forgotten days, when the wilderness stretched across the continent of Africa, there was a greater harmony among beasts and trees. The thorn tree rarely outgrows the attentions of the giraffe, but now the tree has other roles to play. A secretary bird, aloft in a nest, concealed beyond the reach of even the longest giraffe tongue. Far from the tree, the male secretary bird struts in search of food, including snakes to feed its mate. It'll take a couple of hours to catch a cropful. During this time, back at the nest, its mate is eating those snakes that were brought in earlier. These odd birds of prey are not immune to the venom of the snakes they catch. They must dodge the striking reptile, tire it out, and stamp it to death. This pair have youngsters to feed in their canopy nursery. The regurgitated food, which apart from snakes might include grasshoppers, mice, and lizards, is torn up and fed to the young bird. The parent feeds at the same time. One floor below, there's a larder and a rather opportunistic tawny eagle, eager to grab a beakful of a dead reedbuck that doesn't belong to it. The rightful owner returns. To the leopard, the tree of thorns is a convenient peg on which to hang its captured meal. Theoretically, it's out of reach of all but the boldest of scavengers. The leopard is hunted and killed alone by night, and by sheer strength and agility has brought this reed buck, which is almost as heavy as itself, into the tree to feed on at leisure. Farther out on a limb, a colony of rufous-tailed weaver birds hang their homes. In just 2 or 3 days, these skillful artisans can knit a nest, and it's all made of grass. The weaver takes a break for a meal after an hour or so of building in the morning. It feeds mainly on the seeds of the grass it's using for its nest. This bird has already raised 1 brood this season and is followed by its insistently begging offspring. The youngster needs insects as food. And then it's back to work, unless, that is, a juicy grub catches the eye. Now, with instinctive precision, the weaver labors tirelessly at the warp and woof of this intricate fabric. Older nests might need some repairs. They've served their protective purpose once already this season. Built on the tips of branches, they're more difficult for snakes and other predators to get at. There's a wealth of weavers in Africa, and they find in Acacia an ideal hangout. Buffalo weavers build bigger nests. The adult males and juveniles cooperate in assembling these huge stick piles. Sometimes they can be an attraction to other beasts. Bees move in, and weavers move out. Opportunism is rife in the tree's canopy. Every niche can be exploited, whether it's just a hole in the tree or someone else's nest. These lovebirds will probably roost inside the buffalo weaver's treehouse. And there's room up here for a curious plant. Rather like mistletoe, it's not a complete parasite on the thorn tree. Being green, it can make its own food in the sunlight. But its roots do tap the tree's vessels for water and minerals. Lured by the berries, this Darnow's barbet and the aptly named superb starling will become unwitting agents in dispersing the seeds of the plant along other twigs in the canopy. The sticky seeds germinate, penetrate the twig with a tiny root, and a new plant grows on the tree of thorns. tree is a hunting ground. There are those who move in search of their prey, and others who patiently lie in wait. If you're on the menu, it's safer to sit still. The bark has many handy hiding places. It's even better if you're in disguise, like this moth. But the slightest twitch, and you can be discovered. The Abyssinian scimitar bill has an eye for a twitch and extracts some juicy morsels. A larva sidles out of sight, but a woodpecker might find him. The probing bills of the greenwood hoopoes are a natural key with which to unlock the treasures of the bark. Patience is rewarded. The lizard gets its lunch. And with stealth and precision, a chameleon stalks a mantis for a meal. The mantis eats its last fly. It's been suggested that this rocking motion of the chameleon resembles that of a wind-blown leaf, and so disguises it as it creeps in the canopy. The undergrowth around the trees is the highway of our woodland city. The leopard tortoise is slow traffic on these acacia avenues, but it's just one of the many creatures that, by virtue of the woodland's existence, can live here. Under a thorn tree, the leonotis blooms and tempts the scarlet-chested sunbird to sip the sweetness of its flowers. To others, this whole woodland carpet is food. Termites slice up the dead grass and drag it down to underground nests. There, it nourishes not only other termites, but also the tangle of roots from the acacia tree. And while the termites are at work, opportunity knocks for starlings down from the canopy. They have to be quick, for the termites will soon stop collecting grass and vanish below before the sun dries them out. Vervet monkeys find their meals in the undergrowth around our tree. They'll pluck the plants while guinea fowl scratch for grubs. The secretary bird is still hunting, but now its mate is sharing the task. They have these enormous youngsters to feed. Nearly 3 months old, they can almost fly. This one is busy strengthening its wing muscles. Soon the parents will no longer have to fly in the meals. The young birds must instinctively tap the beak of the parent to induce regurgitation of their meal. It's the end of May and the end of the rainy season. Now, briefly, the woodlands will resound with the grunts and murmurs of 1 million wildebeest on the move. For just a few days, the wildebeest stream past. They've come from the drying grassy plains and are trekking northward to where it's still rainy and green. It's part of a slow, year-long movement around the Serengeti, a cycle that follows the seasons and which is as old as the Serengeti itself. And they matter to the acacias. Their droppings enrich the soil, and they graze and trample the grass, lessening the risk of fire sweeping the sun-dried landscape. The acacia has shed its leaves, thereby cutting its water loss. Now, for 5 dry, hot months, what moisture there is to be sucked from the soil must be conserved. The younger acacias, too, shed their leaves and take on the silvery gray color of their thorns. One might even think they were dead, but a closer look at the branches reveals otherwise. The leaves are gone, but the branch itself is tinged with the green of chlorophyll. It's still making food in the sunlight. The bush is very much alive. A tree of thorns is well able to cope with drought. It can survive in the midst of a dry Serengeti Plain. It's perhaps the only shade this Kori bustard will find for miles around. It has long, fine roots that can seek out the deep water table below. It's a parasol for buffaloes, welcome shade from a midday sun beating down from overhead. And they, too, are liberal with their fertilizing dung. Eight cheetahs, taking time out from hunting, find it cooler here, even under the thin canopy of this tree. For a normally solitary animal, this is an unusually large group. Now that the woodlands are dry, the oryxes move in. Like the tree, they're adapted to cope with such dry conditions. They look for succulent bulbs and other moist plants. For the elephant, the tree of thorns is all things: shade, a support, a scratching post, and a hearty meal. The tree's just right to take the weight off such a head. With a tusk in a fork and with its trunk on a trunk, an elephant dozes. Late in the dry season, our acacia does something special. There's no rain, and the ground is still very dry, but it starts to put out leaves. Just what triggers this growth, no one knows. They're small, but bright green and fresh. Soon the whole tree flushes with color. It's an instant attraction. The bush hyraxes are quick to clamber up and cash in on the lush food supply. Just to look at it, we wouldn't expect to find such an unlikely creature successfully exploiting this thorny canopy, lacking as it does a grasping tail or feet that can grip. Even more surprising is the fact that there are features of its skeleton that make the hyrax the closest living relative of the elephant. The elephant, too, now finds the tree a temptation, and with sheer strength and persistence, it will get what it wants. Elephants eat trees. Evolution has equipped them to do it. When there's no fresh grass to eat and the trees are green only on top, then they have to push them down to get at that greenery. The tree of thorns can fight back. The elephant may not succeed every time, but usually the dice are loaded against the acacia, and at least a limb is sacrificed. And it takes a lot of limbs to feed a lot of elephants. But loss of limbs is not a disaster for a tree. In a group of bull elephants like this, there may be only one which is the tree pusher, perhaps the largest and heaviest. Responding to the cracking of the wood, the others are only too ready to enjoy the prize once it has been provided for them. Often it's a wasteful process. Not all of this branch will be eaten, even by 5 or 6 elephants. They'll probably move on soon to another tree. But there's a succession of camp followers moving in the wake of these lumberjacks. Impalas can use what's left. It takes a lot of tree to keep so large an animal going, and less than half of what is ingested will actually be digested. In 16 hours every day, these 5 elephants together will eat the weight of a large automobile, and if possible, will wash it down with 5 bathtubs full of water. Elephants have always eaten trees. It may be that long ago they ate until the trees were gone and then moved out of an area until more trees grew back. Today, the situation is quite different. More and more elephants are forced to inhabit these few remaining refuges, such as the Serengeti woodlands. And as we've seen, it can take a long time for acacias to mature. The tree of thorns is able to withstand a good deal of punishment. But soon the elephants will be back, for because of man, they can no longer leave the Serengeti. One wonders how much longer the trees will last. The destruction of one tree is only a villainous act in our eyes. In reality, it's just an event in the continuous cycle of life. In fact, the elephants have split open a new larder. The larvae of the longhorn beetle are a bonus to a keen-eyed shrike. There are adult beetles, too, evicted from the tunnels in the thorn tree, but only briefly. To these woodland birds, the elephants are benefactors. Undoubtedly, these East African woodlands are changing. The natural loss of one tree in such a dense patch may not seem important, but the area can fairly quickly become just a scattering of isolated trees, no longer a rich and diverse woodland. It's easy to blame the elephant, but there's evidence that others should share the blame. In November, 5 dry months come to an end suddenly. Now, not only flowers spring up on Acacia Avenue, out of the subways come dwarf mongooses. The underground nests of termites make an ideal den and hiding place from rain. Under the thorn trees, these chimneys slowly grow as the termites work to ventilate the chambers of their deep nests. Like all life on Earth, the tree of thorns knows natural death. Lightning strikes, disease and wind can knock it down limb by limb. Then fungi cloak it in beautiful decay. Its bones, its remains, are home to something to the very end. But there are still other trees in their prime to carry on. A tree of thorns blossoms. The tiny clusters of flowers are much like mimosa, another species of acacia. Curiously, the flowers have no petals. All the color is in the stamens. There's little perfume to human noses, but the transformation proves attractive to a variety of pollinating insects. Oddly, this starling seems to find the flowers edible. Perhaps it's less surprising that this giant beetle does too. There are beetles of all sizes. Some can get right inside the tiny cluster. These flowers haven't opened yet. Now 3 or 4 of the cluster have thrust out stamens, completing the powder puff effect of all the flowers. After pollination, they fade, and potentially from each of the cluster, a seed pod will grow. Surprisingly, all acacias belong to the pea family of plants and bear seeds in pods. These of the tree of thorns are characteristically curled. That's no problem to the vervet monkeys, which relish the nutritious seeds inside. A tree festooned in pods is potent advertising, and the vervets are among the first to be attracted. The monkeys are very skillful in their feeding. They only want the seeds, and to get them, they can quickly slice open the pod with their teeth, take out the seeds, and then discard the case. A glance at the empty pod shows just how neat and thorough the monkeys are. And so the tree loses some of its seeds to the vervet monkeys. Not a major disaster, you might think. But in fact, nearly all the remaining seeds are attacked by this tiny beetle. One of them could sit on the head of a pin. It's called a bruchid and lives on the tree of thorns. Other pod-bearing trees have their own matching beetles. Intriguingly, the activities of this bruchid beetle are critical to the survival of the acacia, and it's a story that's intimately linked to the elephant, the giraffe, and the other creatures of these woodlands. At night, the female beetle seeks places on the surface of a young pod where she can lay her eggs. In just a few days, the egg develops into a larva and hatches. The larva must now eat its way into the pod and then into the seed within. Inside the seed, the larva will become the pupa of the beetle. Nearly all these pods, now ripe and fallen, will have beetles developing in them. If, as this X-ray shows, 95% of the seeds have dark oval beetle pupae growing in them, and therefore are most unlikely to germinate and become new seedlings, just how can the tree of thorns survive in sufficient numbers? It certainly won't if the beetle gets to this stage. This seed won't grow. Now the beetle must bite its way out of the pod to freedom, to mate, and to begin its life cycle over again. If the beetle's development was not interrupted, then the future of the tree of thorns would look bleak indeed. The beetle is so successful at parasitizing the seeds that without some natural form of control, our tree of thorns would soon vanish. In fact, very few beetles complete their life cycle and kill the seed. The reason why reveals just how subtle the interrelationships are around the tree of thorns. Paradoxically, the tree relies on having its pods eaten by animals, though not the vervet monkey, which destroys the seed. Instead, it depends on ruminant animals like the impala. The impala eats and digests the pods, but the seeds will pass through intact. While the seeds are inside the impala, two things happen. First, the digestive juices penetrate and soften the coats of the seeds. Without that, they cannot germinate. Then, the beetles are killed. Once the seeds are in the dung, they may be conveniently buried by the numerous dung beetles of the woodland floor. And thanks to the impala, they are dispersed far from the parent tree. And so, from a seed that's been parasitized, eaten, digested, and dispersed, a new tree starts out on its long struggle to maturity. Finally, there's another paradox. The elephant, too, eats pods, and its digestion has the same beneficial effects. The great animal that kills the tree can also sow its seed. It may still be a century or more before this seedling passed through an elephant reaches a size that might resist an elephant's push. Where, then, lies the blame for the destruction of these African woodlands? In truth, by confining the animals, man intervened and changed the ancient harmony. Now there are too many giraffes pruning the growing trees, too many elephants pushing them down, combined with the natural fires burning them back again and again. This is a naturally changing landscape where the fortunes of all living things depend upon one another. But once man inserts himself into the natural process, there's no turning back. And so now, the future of the tree of thorns and all the creatures which depend upon it is up to us. So often on Nature, our films make it seem that man has got the whole world in his hands. And to some extent, that's true. Obviously, man can't control all the processes and forces of nature. But right now, we are the dominant species on our fragile planet. And with that dominance comes some awesome responsibilities. I'm George Page for Nature. Next week, we return once more to Africa's great Serengeti Plain for a film that was made as a companion to this one. It's about the huge granite islands of ancient rocks that provide a stage for the drama of Africa's wildlife throughout the year. Our film is called Copy, A Rock for All Seasons, and it's next week on Nature. I hope you'll join us.